Welcome to a candidate forum organized by Pullman League of Women Voters and the Pullman Chamber of Commerce for State Representative, District 9, Position 1. The candidates are Republican incumbent Mary Dye and Libertarian challenger Brett Borden. This is a 2-year elected position. Joe Schmick, candidate for District 9, Position 2, is running unopposed. My name is Karen Hardy, and I am a member of the Pullman League of Women Voters. I'm delighted to welcome both candidates tonight, and we thank you for your desire and willingness to represent our district. This forum is being recorded and is available on the League's website, where you may also view the Issues Forum from October 12th and the County Commissioners Forum from October 15th. The League is a nonpartisan organization open to both men and women over the age of 16 and provides nonpartisan election information on candidates and issues. The Pullman League never endorses, supports, or opposes any candidate or political party. The League of Women Voters of Pullman adopts position statements based on study and member agreement. Once the League adopts a position, it can then be used to shape public policy. We encourage you to visit the LWV website, where you can examine the complete list of League of Women Voters of Pullman's positions. Questions were submitted to the League before this forum. We cannot take live questions from the audience. The forum is organized as follows. In alphabetical order, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement, after which moderator will ask the question and each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. Mr. Borden will answer odd numbered questions first, and Ms. Dye will answer even numbered questions first. At the end of the question period, each candidate has 2 minutes to make a closing statement. Brett Borden, originally from Spokane Valley, has lived in the 9th District the past 14 years with roots in Tri-Cities and the Palouse. He has experience as a small business owner of a book and record store, as well as in bookkeeping and as a blue-collar manufacturing worker. Brett also serves on the State Executive Committee of the Libertarian Party of Washington as its treasurer. Mary Dye is the current District 9 state representative, a position she has held since 2015. She serves on several committees, including the House Environment Committee, Capital Budget Committee, and Appropriations Committee. She has a BA from the University of Idaho and served in the Peace Corps in Thailand for 2 years. For 30 years, she has run the family wheat farm with her husband, with whom she shares 3 daughters. Each candidate will now have 2 minutes for their opening statement. Mr. Borden will make his opening statement first. Mr. Borden.
Thank you, and thanks to the League for all that you do for your civic duty, educating voters. It's really great. As Karen mentioned, I'm Brett Borden. I am treasurer of the Libertarian Party of Washington. Former small business owner, now work in manufacturing. I'm running so voters have a choice. I didn't want to see any election go unopposed, really. As a libertarian, we vote, or rather we wish to see a world set free in our lifetimes, where people are able to live as they wish, as long as they aren't harming another person, without being controlled by any powerful entity, including the government. In that vein, I fully support individual liberty for all, limited government that works for people and not just the powerful. I'm a regular guy with civic interest, seeking a role in our citizen legislature to be a voice for the people, for all residents, not just a political base. In casting off our old partisan baggage, I think we can embrace a positive future for freedom. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Ms. Dye, you now have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you so much to the League and all that you do for civic engagement and to give voters an opportunity to get more knowledgeable about the people that they're casting their ballot for. I am really grateful to have had the opportunity to serve in the 9th District since 2015. It has been an experience where I realize how important it is that we develop public policy that allows people the freedom to pursue their highest passion, to develop a life full of meaning and purpose, to have the opportunity to reach their highest potential, whatever place in the world that they see themselves called. And I feel that the public policy that we are experiencing, we have so many differences economically from east side, west side, that I feel that the people in our district need a powerful voice to speak their truth to the powers in Olympia that oftentimes develop policies that are built on narratives that are essentially not true about our realities in Eastern Washington. I would like to see our communities fully developed into vibrant and healthy, life-giving communities. And I think public policy can do that by a light touch, by providing the resources, the infrastructure, and the tools that we need to be successful individually in our lives, and to be able to have the access to the resources we need for economic success as well. It's a spiritual, but it's also an economic issue. And I think that I carry that voice to the people in Olympia and can be effective for the people in my community. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have a time to discuss the issues of importance to the constituents. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Okay, question number 1, Mr. Borden. This will be your opportunity to answer the question first. Evaluate the state's responses to COVID-19. What would you have done differently?
It is rather the issue of the moment, is it not? My concern with the state's policy, particularly from the governor, because it's been all executive top-down action, is that it's a one-size-fits-all approach. It doesn't necessarily work for everybody. We've had independent small businesses who have had to close as a result of it. I think the state would have been better advised from the jump to come out and say, hey, this is what we're dealing with. These are the risks. These are ways that we highly encourage you to avoid the chance of becoming ill with the serious disease. Self-determination matters. I mean, we're all, well, I mean, adults in this case, or overseeing families, and that's a call that we need to make ourselves and not just be forced into this one-size-fits-all approach.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Ms. Dye, you now have 1 minute to answer this question. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay.
COVID, the way we handled COVID in our state shows how flawed our emergency law has been, right? So to me, I feel like we've committed a breach of public trust by allowing a long-term ownership of all the powers into the executive branch. We've also really tromped on civil liberties to make those decisions on the local level and to allow people to continue to hold those natural rights that we hold dear, the ability to politically organize, the ability to worship, the ability to self-determination, and to make good choices for our own circumstances. Our governor can't know every person's personal life, but he can give us the resources to make those choices ourselves, and he failed to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Ms. Dye, I apologize. I keep saying Miss, and I keep trying to say Ms, and it's, so my apologies.
No problem.
Okay, question number 2, Ms. Dye. This goes to you. In recent years, the state funding for Washington's public universities has decreased very significantly. Are you in favor of reversing that situation? And please state your reasons.
You know, we were successful in bringing discipline to the ever increasing tuition hikes, and increasing tuition limits people's ability to access a quality education. I think that the public universities have a right to have a responsibility to serve our constituents of our states. They were there specifically so that every kid in our state would have the opportunity to access higher education, and the continually increasing tuition limits people's access to get that kind of education. And if they were a private university and they're trying to compete with the price points of private universities, they're not the same. This is the great equalizer, and to allow those price points to continually rise above the what people in the community can afford is wrong, and we need to bring cost discipline to the university education.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Mr. Borden, you have a chance to respond. Would you like me to repeat the question?
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
My concern with the prospect of increasing funding, much like when we hear about plans for like loan forgiveness, these are serious problems, but I fear that we are not addressing the underlying problems with these out of control costs. We have these, the university system has almost become like one of these too big to fail institutions, because it also comes from the top down. We have government control over these loans. We have government control over a lot of these mandated high costs that go into salaries and the institutions. It's not really addressing the underlying problem that is causing these, in my mind.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Question number 3, Mr. Borden. What do you expect, or what should be the highest priority on the state legislators' agenda for the next session?
Well, I have an inkling that it's going to be all about the budget, and I'm sure we'll probably get questions on that. For me personally, I think the biggest issue right now pertains to justice issues. That's a central issue for me, because these the ways that our justice system is failing to meet the needs of the people is literally spilling out into the streets, because people are feeling like they are being abused, that the system is not working for them. There are numerous ways, from bail reform to getting rid of victimless crime laws to civil forfeiture reform. There's numerous issues that need addressed, and the people are not going to wait for these things to take a generation's time. We need to start addressing them right now.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Ms. Dye?
Yes, so I believe that we definitely need to reevaluate the powers that we gave through emergency with the COVID, and that those powers need to be restrained or have a legislative input at a much earlier stage if the emergency is going to be long lasting. I also believe that we need to develop protections that protect our businesses as they reopen. And we need to address natural resources and our forest health if we want to deal with that. And we also have issues on water resources, and to make sure that our agencies are even-handed in their management of the water resources, and making sure that they don't weaponize agencies against the constituents. So those are some of the concerns that I have, and I hope that we can address all of those.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Ms. Dye, you have supported infrastructure projects like fiber optics and solving water shortfalls. What other infrastructure projects do you have planned for the future?
I'm excited about continuing to work on water delivery from the Columbia Basin project to lands east of the East Low Canal. And we're in process of constructing a number of pipelines, and we'll continue to invest in that, hopefully to really restore health to the Odessa aquifer and secure water supplies for the people living there for long term. We're hoping to also build a long-term solution to adding agricultural lands to that area that are irrigated. And the reason is that we have to secure a domestic supply of food for national security purposes, and also, to complete what was envisioned by our forefathers during the Great Depression, to complete that which was started a national treasure, the Columbia Basin Irrigation Project. It's absolutely essential for our state.
Thank you. Mr. Borden, what infrastructure projects do you find necessary to plan for in our district?
Infrastructure projects are not something that's normally on my radar, admittedly. With being a limited government sort of guy, I am cognizant of the need to have structures in place. We've had the fire problem here recently. Those sort of emergency situations, totally on board. Representative Dye has talked at length in this forum and asked about her high-speed internet initiative. In issues like that, where it is not prudent for private enterprise to go down these roads, but it has interest to the people, as long as it's done in an open, sort of transparent way, I'm not really opposed to such things. I just think they should work for the people and not just be, oh, we're going to give a big contract to a campaign contributor for, someone or other. That's my main concern.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Question 5, Mr. Borden. What actions should Washington State make to mitigate and to respond to the effects of climate change?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is definitely something that the governor is on about quite a bit. I think it's important to keep sight of what we're really talking about here. He went on about used the fires as an example of a climate change problem, and just thought it was kind of distracting from the issue. As government, we need to be aware of reasonable limits on in order to protect the environment. My concern is that in a lot of ways, it tends to be kind of overkill, and unless it has a clear purpose in being introduced in the legislature, I would have to take a critical eye to whether it's necessary or not.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Ms. Dye?
Climate change comes laden with a large menu of policies that, while we would be willing to work on practical solutions to real issues that have a nexus to the climate, we seem to have a radical departure of opinion on how to solve those problems. I think it's really important to understand the long-term impacts that allowing such a deep reach into our energy economy will have on the ability of our free market and free enterprise system to sustain itself. It really tends to wed the two together in a dance that I really oppose deeply. I feel that we need to be careful about the policies that we choose to work on when it comes to climate.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Ms. Dye, what is your opinion of a state income tax?
simply put, a state income tax is not constitutional. It is at this point really imprudent given what we have experienced in 2020 economically, and in particular for our mom and pop businesses, our downtown Main Street, to go ahead and think that we can tax our way out of a budget deficit, and to use COVID as a predicate to install a long-term state income tax is cynical at best. And I would highly oppose the idea that we could possibly tax more people who have invested their life savings, their heart and soul, their dreams and hopes into their businesses, only to watch them be controlled and shut down for so long and then say pay taxes too. It's the worst of both worlds. I oppose taxes altogether.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Mr. Borden?
I have to agree with Representative Dye. An income tax, I don't find as a solution. I think one of the things that is often forgotten when it comes to this talk about taxes, there's this this expectation that, oh, well, if we raise taxes, I'll get all these great things and then people will be better off. But taxation by nature is regressive. It hurts the lower income working people more than it does the wealthy. And now we hear a lot of these options, income tax, as a way to redirect that to wealthier people. But not only is it unconstitutional in this case, it just will have a tendency to pass that cost down to working people in cost of living. I don't think there's a real way where it's going to meet its intended goal.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Question number 7, Mr. Borden. The largest state revenue source is the sales tax. This is a regressive tax, which means that it is a relatively larger burden on families with a low income. What measures do you favor to improve the fairness of Washington state revenue sources?
Yeah, definitely along the same path. The sales tax is perhaps one of the worst taxes because it's even more regressive than a naturally regressive system. My personal goal is to reduce the budget and have the state overseeing less things in our lives. They're devolving responsibility to our more local governments and to the people and communities themselves, where everything doesn't have to be top down from the state. The state always says, well, we're helping people, but we send $1 out and into this bureaucracy, and the payback that we get is much less than that dollar. I think in most cases, things can be handled more effectively and more fiscally prudent if the state does not get involved.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Ms. Dye?
So in terms of taxation, a state sales tax, our state sales tax is a tax that spreads over a broader base of people. And it includes people who are traveling through our state. So we do capture a few of those additional dollars. It's a tax that it provides income in a very irregular way, depending on the economy. Obviously, this year, by shutting down for a quarter all of the businesses, and in particular hospitality, it is going to show a drop in revenue. That vulnerability makes it difficult to have consistency in state programs, but I agree that they've been required to cut their budgets and tighten their belts. Individuals are. So we have to find ways to reduce the size and scope of our government.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Question 8, Ms. Dye. Do you favor authorizing the state to invest the long-term care services and supports trust account into stocks or other methods of investment? That's the
Um,
referendum on resolution 8212.
I would have to admit that I probably would not favor that. It's risky.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ms. Dye. Mr. Borden?
Yeah, until I was reading through my ballot the other day, I wasn't aware of this either. To me, my opposition to it stems from that this is our tax dollars going out into the state. They're choosing how to spend it. You know, it's one thing if we're talking something like, oh, an individual retirement account where people have more control themselves, really not comfortable with the government having it be even easier to play fast and loose with tax dollars from the people, particularly when the government is going into private enterprise like that. To me, I just read that and think, well, I wonder who's going to get these sort of these state dollars. Could it be crony interests of politicians in the government? It's, to me, I think it's just misguided.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Mr. Borden, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the economy and as a result decreased the state revenue. What are your suggestions for methods of compensating for and mitigating this decrease?
I think the first thing that we could do is stop restricting people so people can get out there and save their livelihoods and stop artificially making things harder on them. Yes, it's going to result in reduced funding for budgets. But if you look at the past 10 years, there's just been this steady rise on the budget pretty much across the board because the state keeps getting its hands into more and more things, building bureaucracy. And as I was saying earlier, when we are charging the state with these all these tasks, we are not necessarily getting the best result for our increased tax dollars. I think that we should start talking about what does the state really have to be involved in. That's just has its hands in too many pots.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Ms. Dye?
So the budget shortfall outlook is looking better than it did in the middle of the year, thankfully. But I totally agree that the answer to this is to reinvigorate private sector business and allow them to get back to full capacity. The other piece of it is that we did have a fairly robust rainy day fund that would help cover some of the shortfall. That's what it's there for, is for the rainy day. And I think that the remainder of the shortfall, we need to use some of the federal relief funds. It was there for that. And I think that we can definitely find ways to cut. We have added since 2015 today, we started at 36 billion. We've added 20 billion in tax revenue. So I think we have a way to get our way out of the budget shortfall and make ourselves fiscally whole if we are prudent without taxing.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Question 10, Ms. Dye. Whitman and other Washington counties can only increase property taxes 1% a year, and the county expenses increase about 3 or 4% per year. What measures do you suggest to enable Washington State to reverse this untenable long-term situation?
Right. So if you look at it from the standpoint of the average person who lives in Whitman County, they have a home, they live in that home through their life cycle, and they have to pay taxes every year on that home. So that's their savings, that's their stability, that is their the texture and the template for their lives. And so that's why there has to be discipline on the property tax. We're in a time where we're going to see a lot of additional growth in our communities in Eastern Washington. I think people are going to seek to move here for the quality of life and the safety and security of our communities. And I think that we will have the opportunity to increase our tax base simply by the fact that we're going to be experiencing growth in the future that comes with a cost to the county, but finding that balance will be the challenge for our decision makers at the county level without raising taxes.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Mr. Borden?
Yeah, I really don't care for the property tax in that because as things keep getting raised, more dependent on property taxes, in part because of this appetite for increased spending, the result is even people who own their house free and clear, it's almost as if they're renting it from the government still. It's it directly contributes to when it increases, directly contributes to increased cost of living, increased rents. I don't like that amongst a lot of taxes. I think increasing property taxes brings a lot of societal ills to a greater extent. And I totally don't think it should be able to be runaway raises for that reason.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Mr. Borden, what is your stand on Referendum 90 and why?
Referendum 90, it's a complex issue. My philosophical foundation is that parents should remain in position of how to raise their child. That's just fundamental. I find that the opt-out part of Referendum 90 is important for protecting that. I get why people are concerned. I think one thing that often gets forgotten is this is not bringing about sex ed into existence. It's been around a long time. This is a tweak to it, but a lot of the ways that I hear it is just kind of gunning for sex ed completely. I think that it is important that children have some foundation, particularly in middle and high school, on this subject in case their parents are not okay with it. But it's really just a slight expansion on what's already here, and it has opt out. So I'm indifferent.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Ms. Dye?
This was an example of policymakers overstepping or refusing to listen, turning a tin ear to the concerns of a lot of constituents. We had thousands of parents concerned coming to testify, and then we ran the debate in the middle of the night. It was passed at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we had over 100,000 people listening on TVW in the middle of the night to watch this debate. It means that we are impacting people's cultural sensitivities in a way, and we're making a policy decision that overrides some deeply held values that parents have about acculturating their children. It is a huge expansion in that those early childhood years, the children are at very different levels of growth and development, and it can negatively impact the smaller age children. And so, yes, people need to be heard. People need to have their voices be heard. And this is what R90 does. It allows them a vote.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Ms. Dye, what is your opinion about the recent regional trails plan prepared? What is your position relative to the conversion of the rail-banked railroad line between Pullman and Colfax to a public walking and bicycle trail?
Right, there's been a large number of people in the Pullman area that have been advocating for this trail. I do question that it will have on the private property owners along the trail. I've driven along the edge of the trail with the road that's adjacent. It's a very lightly traveled gravel road. There could be answers to protecting people's property rights and privacy by not converting that. The other piece of it is that that corridor could be converted back to rail. If we change that position, then we lose that opportunity. We certainly saw some freight constrictions this year, given the size of the crop, and could have utilized more freight availability. But I know that it's a local issue and people continue to advocate. And I think we need to bring a public process to bear that works to relieve some of the conflict between the parties that oppose on each side.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Mr. Borden?
Yeah, I'm not particularly well versed in this one. I agree that property rights are paramount here. We need to make sure that any sort of project has the consent of the people whose property it is. That's pretty fundamental. It sounds like it is more of a local issue, in which case I'd be willing to bring it to the people, all else being equal. If there is support for it, then I think this is where localized efforts work better than state top-down efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Mr. Borden, how has the district benefited from the legislature in the past 2 to 4 years?
That's a pretty broad one. I mean, from what I hear from people, they just kind of feel like we're drowned out a bit. We have all this increases in spending every chance that the governing caucus and the governor get. It's more spending, more taxes. I hear people that doesn't ring true to them, and I tend to agree. So that's about the extent of it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Ms. Dye?
I guess I would point to a couple of things. One, the highway 26 and 195, where we were able to get passing lanes and expansion and some safety measures put on that for the WSU students. The process was important. It was the Students Association that led the charge in that, and I'm proud of the work that they did. I'm really happy about the ability for us to expand a model of broadband for rural. And I think that many of our communities, especially along Highway 27, will benefit from that immediately. And I think that getting water to the Columbia Basin and having the legislature support those efforts is going to be really important long-term for our communities. As far as understanding our culture, I think we have a long ways to go in advocating. We did prevent some things, like I think we did a good job of preventing the change in refrigerants for our food processors and food industry. There's a lot more that we can do. There's so much more that needs to be done.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Ms. Dye, this is question 14. What are your thoughts on alternative election methods, such as ranked choice voting? Would you support a local options bill to allow counties in Washington to use alternative election methods if they choose?
I'm a conservative by nature, and I believe in the representative government that our republic holds dear, and I treasure those traditions. Our voting has changed many times in Washington state, and each time we create inequities and ability for minority voices to be heard, it would be diminished. And I feel that we have to protect the systems that can be integrous, that we can be assured that the vote is fair and done justly, and that there is no ability to put your thumb on the scales. And we've passed a number of bills in the legislature since the majority took large majority that did put thumb on the scales of our electoral process. And I think that protecting the integrity of the vote keeps people engaged in their civic responsibilities. When we create a sense of untrust, then we will lose that social contract. And I think that's very bad for our nation.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Mr. Borden?
Yes, absolutely. Election reform is a major issue for me. It's an area where I'm a big nerd. I absolutely support really any of several potential systems that allow the people more control over their vote and allow for a more representative result. Ranked choice voting is the most well-known one. I am endorsed by Fair Vote Washington, who is the largest advocacy organization in the state for RCV. These allow people to cast a vote that is not weighed down by external factors, that is not a strategic vote, that somebody can say, hey, I can vote for what I want without having to worry that I'm harming myself in the process. You can rank people in order. It allows people more control. Absolutely support it, 100%.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Mr. Borden, this is the last question of the evening. What is the makeup of a successful state legislator? Do you think you can work across party lines to benefit the whole state?
Oh yeah, I'm a libertarian. I'm an outsider. I can't retreat into my partisan, friend group or something and live happily or get stuff done. By nature, we are working issue by issue with people in other parties, in no party. My focus is representing people first, individual rights first. On an issue by issue basis, I already have established relations with people who represent other parties and no parties at all. It's part of the landscape here as a legislator. I think coming from outside the system, in some ways it's a hindrance, but in other ways it's not weighed down by baggage of what's gone on in the past. So I'm ready.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. Ms. Dye?
I believe that as a legislature, for me, I reach out to love the people that I serve. I love their stories. I love what they do in their life. They inspire me. I take those stories and those inspirations to the body politic, and I try to make those stories meaningful so that we can advocate effectively for the needs of the people here. The stories that I see on email, the people that have reached out, when I go to their communities, I see their homes and their families. I have such deep compassion, and I see so much potential that's unrealized in our district. And taking that and framing it in a way that is meaningful to people who've never experienced life here and don't have really a way to touch in and understand that very effectively. That I feel like is where I feel like my role is the best, strongest, and my voice is most effective for the constituents that I serve.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Well, we've come to the conclusion of our time for questions, and we'll invite the candidates to make a 2-minute closing statement. Mr. Borden, you go first, please. You have 2 minutes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Once again, the league, everybody tuning in. I think this is kind of all the forums that we've done along this process, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and that's great. Along the theme of what we were saying in the last question, it matters to be future focused. For a long time, we've been doing the same thing. Eastern Washington, very Republican. The state as a whole is fairly Democratic. It's been growing more in that direction. Nothing really changes in my mind, except for maybe increasing division. And that doesn't work for the people. It doesn't work for you or I. It just kind of works for that partisan seesaw. 2020 is where we've found ourselves, where we ended up as a result of cycle after cycle of the same thing. I'm an outsider. I'm not beholden to any special interests or the political system. If elected, I will stand and already stand for everyone's rights, no matter who. That's what being a libertarian is all about. Your freedom is my priority. If you afford me the chance, I will represent you and your interests as best I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borden.
Thank you so much to the League for hosting this and following your mission with such a great passion to make sure that people have an opportunity to be civically engaged before they cast their vote. It's a wonderful opportunity for us. I wish that we could be there in person this year. I think that our First Amendment rights to have political engagement in person, to be able to really interact so that our voters have a chance to know what they're voting for and to be involved, I think is really important. This year in particular, I am concerned deeply about how vulnerable we are to political messages and messaging at the national level. And we're not able to really drill down into what and how that plays out at our level, and who we're voting for matters, and understanding where we come from and what we can, what our value proposition is to the voters is hard to communicate. And I think that it's an unfairness to the body politic this year. What I see for our district is tremendous potential as we recover from this disruption of this year. And I see it as an opportunity to rethink the values that makes our communities great, and see opportunities to expand our downtowns, reinvigorate our business sector, bring our young people back into our community, and show them a life of connectedness that they've longed for but haven't had for a long time because the economy has been urban centric. I see our opportunity for our children to really rethink school and liberate our educational systems to be more locally focused and really reach more personally into our families. So I thank you so much for this opportunity and ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dye. Well, I would like to thank Mr. Borden and Ms. Dye and all participants for joining the League of Women Voters of Pullman and the Pullman Chamber of Commerce State Representative District 9 Position 1 Forum. If there is a topic we did not discuss, I encourage you to contact the candidates directly. Ballots will be mailed early this election. I have mine. If you have not received your ballot, check with the County Election Office 509-397-5284. If you are not registered to vote or have moved, there is still time to register. The deadline is October 26th. You can register online at www.votewa.gov. For democracy to work, we must vote. It matters. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Dye. Thank you, Mr. Borden. It was a pleasure. And good night.